Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast, where we attack shame anywhere we can get it. We are very much about healing, especially in the areas of sexual shame, spiritual shame, and relational shame. And so I have an exciting couple that I'm going to be interviewing today on some of these topics. And before I introduce them, I just want to give a few updates on things that are going on at my practice. So just a reminder that in June, I'm going to be having a ketamine group experience for men who are looking to recover from sexual shame. You know, lots of men who come from religiously conservative structures oftentimes were told things like they were porn addicts or sex addicts or perverse or, I don't know, lots of different things that are problematic and that affect their ability to enjoy sexuality and to negotiate sexuality with partners successfully and effectively. So that's an exciting thing. We're also going to be starting a male sexual shame group, which is like a weekly group for 7 weeks. And I'll be giving you details on that. But if you're interested, you can already call my office and get on the waiting list for that. I think that's all we have going on right now. So I'll just pause with that. Without further ado, let me introduce my guests. I have Britton and Carolee Beckham with me today. They were both raised in the strict dogma of the Mormon Church, and with infidelity threatening their marriage and family, found themselves at a cliff's edge of their relationship. Through a deep commitment to heal, they left everything they knew to find themselves. Over a period of 5 years, they rebooted their relationship and traveled their world, seeking the truth with 4 kids in tow. That's no easy task. They have emerged on the other side as what they refer to as a powerfully embodied and awakened couple with a powerful message to share. So I'm really excited to dive in to a more maybe personal story. A lot of times I bring on guests who are authors or professionals, and I love it when I can have people talk to real world, real life, personal experiences. And welcome to the show, Carolee and Britton.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Natasha, for having us on.
Absolutely, for sure. I see that you have something on your finger, so I hope are you dealing with a broken finger?
I did. I broke a finger, yeah.
Oh, that's so painful. I'm so sorry.
We're on the home stretch of it, so.
Okay, that's good. All right. Well, give me a little bit more of an intro. I mean, that's a nice kind of like overview, but tell us a little bit more about yourselves, both of you, and even maybe a bit about how you started your relationship, how you met, etc.
Well, we met like most good Mormons do at Singles Wards. We met at a Singles Ward in Orem after I graduated from BYU, Idaho, and he had returned from his mission. We both had served missions. He went later, so he was like, how old were you when you got home?
26.
Yeah, okay. So we met at the Singles Ward. He was 26, I was 25.
Yeah.
We got married in the Salt Lake Temple a year later. Really kind of just did the normal Mormon stuff. Like we were just really plugging along, We were living in Utah County. Our oldest, he's 13 now, he started school going to American Heritage. Which is very religious, very Mormon religious private school. So we were like really in it, in so many ways, both having served missions. But infidelity and betrayal was something that was a recurrent theme in our partnership. And that caused a lot of like trauma for me. And I mean, there was a lot of just trauma. And we actually went through the mechanisms of the church. Like Britton had a disciplinary council and he was disfellowshipped for a year. And we like really kind of went the route of trying to heal this the way that was prescribed. You know, we're sixth generation Mormons. So like it was deep in everything. What we discovered was the trauma and the just everything, the effects of everything that we'd gone through hadn't gotten any better through the disciplinary council. In fact, there was even more trauma that I realized I was experiencing through that whole process. And so, yeah, we started seeking, well, during that, we also started seeking other alternative kind of approaches to healing. And ultimately, we are where we are today because of our commitment to healing our embodiment, healing our sexuality. I will just say that a huge part in helping me reclaim and rewrite what was your program. Like, I was so grateful to have you, Natasha, and your Reclaiming Female Sexuality program, your 8-week program that you were doing. We at the point that I did it, we were living
Super
in
clutch.
Bali.
Super clutch.
Yeah, we were living in Bali, and I would wake up I'd like stay up at midnight and like 1 a.m. to join your live calls so that I could learn what I didn't know. So I
Wow.
mean, do you want to jump in and I don't know.
Yeah, we have a lot of gratitude around those. Was it 8 weeks?
Yeah, it was eight
Yeah,
weeks.
8 weeks, and like Carolee was learning and like opening her mind so much in each one of those sessions, and it was also, we had already sold everything and committed to just starting a new life together. We had our kids. We were in Bali. We were essentially homeless, right? We're living in whatever we're at, Airbnbs, etc. And we were still working through some of the most good finer details and agreements of our relationship. And so that program that she joined with you in Bali was, yeah, super important, and landed perfectly, so thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so glad. I totally remember that. And I remember going, wow, what time is it there, Carolee, that you're, that you're joining me? But that's one of the reasons why I like doing the online groups is that anybody can get help from anywhere, even if they have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get it.
Yeah, it was really intense, but it was so good. I mean, and I even one
Well,
of
and it's just that one of the things was that we never could find people that could relate to Mormonism, right? And so like the fact that you could, and you could talk about sexuality, knowing all the stuff that was on top of that, yeah, it was just so important
Yeah,
and
because we had already
crucial.
been like moving into kind of more sex positive spaces and connecting with like tantra communities and like really seeking our like healing this on a deep level. I mean, I was a victim of sexual abuse in my childhood too, and and Britain as well. And we had deep patriarchal shame that was really programmed so deep into both of us. I found that whenever I would go to some of these other very sex positive places, I'd have to explain again and again the true nature of what I really was coming from. The fact that I had like it wasn't that I didn't even have desire. I had like negative desire. I was like programmed to think that desire was something that I just couldn't even access. I wasn't embodied. I wasn't in tune with my body. I There was discomfort and like lack of self-love. I mean, there were so many things, and I couldn't explain this to people that had not come from the same background. So you were like such a breath of fresh air because I dropped in, and the way you were able to like teach what you were teaching and hold the container really helped me to not to like feel seen so that I could get past the story and move into the new way of seeing it. So I know it started off with an
Huge
introduction, but
plug for your
more
online
of like
group.
Natasha, thank you. And also I want to add one more thing. Part of one of the weeks you were talking about like this self-love and encouraged us to do like a really beautiful photo shoot of ourselves or something. So I booked one. I booked a really sexy photo shoot in Bali, and those are some of my favorite photos to this day. And I like got naked on the beach and like had this really great time. And so that was also, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your guidance and your teaching and your message and your light. So
So good.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. You even shared some of those with us in the group. They were beautiful. And yeah, it's so many of those things. I already want to talk, I already want to ask you 500,000 questions. One thing I will ask, which is I'm already feeling weird about asking this because it's not, betrayal comes in all shapes and sizes. However, in religious cultures, oftentimes we do conflate the meaning of infidelity. Like, in mainstream land, we're usually talking about a sexual betrayal with another person, right? So whether it's emotional or physical, there's another person involved. And oftentimes in religious circles, this term infidelity gets used for masturbation use, pornography use, kind of solo sexuality use, which is still not in the agreement, maybe, of the couple, which is why there is betrayal. At the same time, I guess I just want to clarify without you having to share any gory details. But when you're referring to infidelity, can you give us a little sense of what the two of you were kind of dealing with? Was it a porn issue, masturbation issue, like a lot of Mormons deal with, or was it more than that?
Um, so it was definitely with other people. There were other people involved. So a lot of it was emotionally, a lot of it was like online. There was that was kind of the majority of it. And then there was kind of like a one relationship that kind of really turned into an affair. And that was what kind of like, yeah, destroyed everything, like gave us the darkest thing to look at, put me into a mental prison. Like I had felt because of my religious programming that I destroyed everything, that I had been told to preserve and protect and to love and to cherish. And it's funny because you can hold, what I've learned through all my shadow work and healing is you can hold two vibrations at once. A lot of people want to be like, oh, he's a cheater, never forgive, and just all this shame and hatred against someone that does that, but they don't have any. It's like, where's their heart and compassion for their own, that person's situation? What made them leave the relationship? Obviously, they weren't satisfied. I mean, let's have a little bit of understanding, like, and so Carolee and I had to come to the grips that our relationship wasn't satisfying either one of us, both sexually, emotionally, and spiritually. Now, were we partially satisfied? And in some ways, we definitely were. We loved each other. We had a lot of fun together. We loved actually just being together. A lot of our relationship, we just wanted to be away from the kids. We wanted to go do our own thing. That was one thing that we always loved, was just being together because we just felt so at home. And but there was this deeper connection, this deeper underlying energy that was kind of between us that wasn't being honored, activated, and like used and part of our everyday relationship. And especially in sex, it was basically she was disembodied, I was quote unquote over sexual or hypersexual. So there was a lot of stuff there, a lot of like uh quote unquote baggage to go through, or dynamic of the relationship, which every relationship has its own set of things, and so that shouldn't be overlooked. But yeah, mine was definitely with other people.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess you could say that there, yeah, it really wasn't like a solo sexual experience for him, and it really, and it wasn't just a one-time situation in our relationship, right? We met at church, we got married a year later, we were pregnant not too long after actually getting married. Within a year, we were pregnant and had a miscarriage, and then had another baby, like then got our second pregnancy, which is our oldest now. And pretty much with each pregnancy, there was some level of betrayal that occurred, kind of in conjunction with the distancing of my pregnancy, like my emotional, pull away, and my discomfort in my body, and like all of those demands would kind of activate this shadow in him
For
that would
sure.
seek out attention and connection. And so, like, the very first disclosure of infidelity came to me in a bishop's office following the birth of our first child. So I like literally remember sitting there in the bishop's office with our baby on my lap, and all of a sudden the bishop, he had already confessed to the bishop privately, and the bishop invited us both in for now me to be informed for the first time in my life about what it was that he had done at that point in time. And and it was like there was this inability for both of us. We didn't know anything about relationship agreements and how to like make them from a heart-centered, like conscious place, from an empowered place. And we were really like living the deep program of, I mean, even down to at one point in one of the homes we built in Utah County, we literally had the white picket fence, like we were really on the outside, really look picture perfect Mormon. But on the inside, there was all of this, there was this pain and there was this hurt and there was this disconnect. And there was like, at one point early on in our marriage, I was like, I think the trauma from my child is affecting my embodiment, infecting my pleasure. And he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like we didn't even realize how codependent we were. Yeah, all of the things. So yeah,
It
that
was definitely all the things.
when we're talking about infidelity, we're literally actually talking about emotional affairs, texting, and even some physical activity that happened more than once. That we had to like unwind and weave, and it was a frequent enough thing to where, like, especially the one that did turn into kind of more of a full-fledged affair, like it literally caused significant betrayal, trauma in my system. Now on this side of everything, I'm not ever triggered anymore. I have no effects of PTSD. Like we've given so much to our healing on this, that like we really are this embodied conscious union that feels so safe and so in alignment with our agreements, and so awakened in our sex that like, yeah, like having a conversation of what it's like to live without shame is one we're excited to have. But yeah, that's kind of the depth of like where we really were.
Can I just say from my side, you know, a healed someone that is the perpetrator of infidelity, right? And that goes through the healing process. What I can tell your audience is, when you're dealing with infidelity, what's happening is you're leaking your energy out to people around you, and that energy is being given through all sorts of different ways, and it's attracting those that are interested actually subconsciously in it. So there's a nice pairing that happens, and that's why it was really easy for it's really easy for people that are looking and seeking for extramarital relations to actually find them. Um, and what I found was it was always tempting. Oh, there's another person here. I wonder how she would be interested in me. And like, just finding that, getting that hit of interest was enough for me to just feel good. Like, oh, she wink faced my text. Okay, great. Whatever it was. And what I can tell you is after we went through the process of the with the church through kind of quote unquote healing or repentance or whatever, I didn't come out the other side of that not having temptations, not understanding, I didn't come out with all of that understood and healed. And there was still the same exact pull. There was still the same desire to leak my energy. There was still all of it. And I didn't understand why. Oh, I'm just broken. It's just, I just gonna have to fucking like totally deny myself for the rest of my life. And it was so hard. But diving deep into the shadow work and doing the healing, I can say that I'm on the other side of that. There isn't any of that. I don't need to leak my energy. I don't even like, it's so buttoned up and tight because of the relationship that we've built, the agreements that we have, and the depth that we share together. My energy doesn't leak. I'm not tempted by other women. In fact, it's quite fun to just now stand in my truth and like honor the beauty that is around me in such a way that she appreciates it equally. And so yeah, we have a beautifully interesting relationship, and it's very healed and very uh yeah, that's why we're here with you, because we want to talk about our healing. We want to share with people that it's possible. We also want to tell people like, hey, we're here to help guide you through the process, and we can show you how we did it.
Yeah. So going back to why I felt it was important to talk about this to begin with, as far as definitions, is that I think how we language things is a part of healing, and how we frame things is a part of healing. And I think one of the things that we start off right away, which we'll talk a little bit about, kind of sexual shame scripts and what types of sexual shame scripts you both feel you were affected by. But I always find it very interesting that we conflate, like when we talk about infidelity, although I never want to minimize pain, because it can be very painful to find out that somebody has been doing something behind your back, whether it's what they're eating or how they're spending money or whether or not they're touching their own bodies or whatever. But it is interesting to me that oftentimes in these religious settings, we include a relationship with ourselves, with my own body, with my own mind, as infidelity, right? So I'm just not going to language it that way. For me, if you've broken an agreement because you come from a religion where the standards are, we're not going to touch our own bodies, well, you can be upset about that and you can have discussions about that, but I'm not going to call that infidelity, right? So for me, infidelity is when we break an agreement with the person we've committed to be with sexually and emotionally in certain ways, and then we, do that with other people. And it can be,
I love the definition. Yeah, it's great.
yeah, it can be a super involved person, somebody you've fallen in love with and have an ongoing relationship with, and it can be somebody on a chat room, that you hardly even know at all. But that's where I would draw the line between betrayal and infidelity. And so I just think it's important to talk about that, given our audience. And even the journey, I think, of sexual shame begins with our inability to have a relationship with our own bodies in a way that, when you talked, Carolee, for example, about having negative desire, like I think that's what you said. Like I'm guessing you probably did not have an upbringing that encouraged your ability to hone into your own sexuality, your own drive, your own passions, your own fantasies. Am I correct in that, or am I incorrect?
Well, yeah, I think you would be correct in saying that. I mean, I did at a very young age, I was a victim of sexual abuse. And so that activated my own like sex in a way that I explored. I did explore self-touch like as a young girl and into my teenage years, and that was completely riddled with shame like the my entire life. And so, yeah, and I would joke around with my mom, bless her heart. I love my mom. I've got a great relationship with her. She's a wonderful woman. But like I knew I could tease her. I could say things like boobs around her and she'd get all bright red, like there really just wasn't I wasn't raised in I mean, I was very much raised with like I have to as a young girl cover my shoulders. I'm not wearing garments yet, but like I totally have to dress as if I'm wearing garments, which now the garments have even changed. I mean, we won't go down that road. But
I can't believe they did that.
yeah, so there was like this deep, deep programming about my body, about my pleasure, about my desire, even to the point where like I grew up in Alaska and there was quite a high population of members up in Alaska. We even had a seminary building, like the only one out of the lower 48 states, and I like self-inflicted this regulation to my friends. They all thought it was from my parents, but I told my parents I'm not going to date non-Mormons, right? Like I had all these weird rules about like who I could even be interested in. And I had my first kiss at 13, but I couldn't even talk to my mom about it till I was 21. So like yes, like there was this whole thing. And I was very much a virgin when I married him at 26, and so I didn't know how to access my pleasure. I didn't have a relationship with my body in any positive way. I struggled through all of my early 20s with significant weight. And at one point, my heaviest, I was heavier than I ever was with any of like when I was pregnant with my kids, full 9 months pregnant at my heaviest in my early 20s, I was heavier than I ever was pregnant, like huge weight issues, self body issues, all of it. Like it was just programmed deep in my being. Like I didn't know how to access pleasure without the shame and the program. And yeah, like I like to say now as I'm describing it, I was really deeply programmed to be a wife and a mother, but
Mhm.
never a lover. And
Yeah.
so a huge part of what I've gained through being willing to look, yeah, what he did, like it hurt to a level that I can't really even explain. Like the depths of pain and anguish and sorrow and heartbreak were so real for me. But I chose really early on, with or without him, I knew I needed to heal because I had all of this other stuff that his betrayals just kind of shined a spotlight on.
Mhm.
And it was like, okay,
Right.
and for us, he was committed and willing to like stay with me, and I was committed and willing to stay with him and not make any sudden decisions about the status of our relationship as we like began to like do this work of deconstructing and unwinding these deep-seated beliefs that had come from both of our family culture and just the culture in general that really set us up in a lot of ways to fail at being in a healthy partnership.
Yeah. What would you add to that, Britton, as far as just kind of messages that you feel affected your ability to be embodied or to be authentic instead of trying to fit into, I'm guessing, the righteous priesthood box?
Yeah, so with sexuality, I my family, like, we weren't as strict around it, in our family culture. I had four brothers, so the five of us would like joke about our things, all our junk all the time. Like that was just a part of our growing up. So it wasn't like, but what was true was that any sexual experience I had before marriage, like um, hand jobs, making out too hard, even intercourse, um, and it was always riddled with guilt. There was nothing, no act that I ever did in sex, including masturbation, that was like, self-pleasure. It was just always guilt afterwards. Guilt, 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 guilt. And it was just like such a sad story. So I remember the day that I finally recognized it was not long after we left the church. I had this moment where I was just thinking about my guilt in the past, and I was like, it was just like it was all hitting me, and it was like, it's just about consent. You can do whatever you want. And I was just
Mhm.
at this moment where it's just like I just cut all the guilt out, all the shame, everything. It was just like goodbye. All that was great. I had such good experiences, and I did. I had a lot of fun, before marriage, and then it was just after marriage where things, started to the sex went. I wanted to have a very sexual relationship with her. I told her that before we got married, and she was open to it. But what happened was, like all sorts of things, environment, like the birth control, getting pregnant, all of that started to affect everything, and you don't realize how to navigate these things when you're young little kids. And so yeah, it all just took its toll.
Yeah, as a sex therapist, I can definitely collaborate or corroborate that the stories I hear that start the patterns, right? When people come to see me 10, 15, 30 years after their marriage, it's these stories that start early on that oftentimes we are very ill equipped to know how to manage, have very little comprehensive sexual education. And then on top of it, like you're saying, those of us who grow up in these systems that really kind of pair guilt with sex, even if it's unintentional, because I think a lot of Mormon folks would say, no, but we see sex as good and sacred just at the right time and in the right place with the right person, which sounds really lovely once you get there. But everything before that is really paired with guilt and shame, which can't help but psychologically create this Pavlovian response that then even when you do get married, that doesn't just automatically go away. And then you're two, like you said, young, dumb kids that don't have much capacity in knowing how to communicate about sex, how to talk about different ideas, desires, what do we want, different drives, even understanding the drive isn't
Yeah.
something that you need to take so personal, right? Like, oh, this means you don't want me or you're objectifying me or you're
Yes.
a lot of drive is just drive. It's just biological, and then some of it is environmental, and some of it we have maybe a little bit of control over, and some of it we don't. But how are we going to manage the conversations around these things is, I think, something that most young couples, even those not raised in conservative religions, are very ill equipped with, which creates a lot of story making and a lot of drama and tragedy, really, between two people that generally love each other, generally are committed to each other, and want something positive. So let me ask a little bit. So you go through, you talk about, obviously there was this kind of issue that you were dealing with, Britton, right? And you felt, I'm guessing, a little bit even maybe out of control with it, or like, I don't know what's wrong with me. You mentioned, I'm broken. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I just need to accept I'm an asshole or whatever for the rest of my life. So you're having this kind of like, this like self, kind of how you're
Self-hating,
self-explaining.
didn't
Yes.
trust myself. It was dark.
Right. Right. And then, like you said, all the message, once a cheater, always a cheater, and so then the culture is also giving you messages that you're not worthy, that you're not good, that you're not, a good or healthy man to be in a relationship with. So insert the church. So you go to church and you're like, I've got this problem. I'm going to confess. I'm going to repent. What is the church's healing program? What do they offer?
Yeah, so good question.
Yeah.
And yeah, just to paint just a little bit of that picture mentally and emotionally how I was in a very dark place at the maximum of this. I felt like I was in a mental prison, perhaps a spiritual one. I felt like I didn't want to leave Carolee, but I also didn't want to be there. I didn't feel connected to her. I didn't even know how to start the process of healing. I didn't think it was possible to change anything. I didn't think it was possible that I could find happiness with her again, because would she ever trust me? Could she ever even find pleasure in her body? Would I know how to stop cheating? All of these things were plaguing me at a constant basis for like a year, a solid year, during the hardest part of all this. And there was many times where I was suicidal. I was like, I remember lying in bed many a night and thinking, I just need to get my gun. I knew exactly where it was, and I was just going to end my life. And I was going to do it right there in front of her because I couldn't handle it anymore. It was way too hard. So that's what I needed to heal from. And what did the church offer? Well, son, you've sinned, and now you need to come and talk to us about how you're going to change your behavior. And you can tell us every bad deed you did. And now we're going to take away the ability for you to connect with God for a year by taking away the sacrament and its meaning. And you're not worthy enough to connect with God. So we'll just take that away. And, this was basically the process of the church. Change your behavior, Britain. Change it. And they put the pressure on you with spiritual damnation, nothing else. There was no emotional support. They did recommend that we get like therapists. Okay, great. And then I went, funny enough, the therapist I ended up getting was one of the council of the 12 on the the council that was like,
The stake
the
presidency,
stake
like the
president,
High
not the
Council.
state, yeah, the high council of the president of the stake, that was weighing in on my issue. So I knew him
So
from that meeting.
you have a dual boundary going on with the person who is assigned to judge you, because they are officially
Yes.
called judges of Israel, right? So he's assigned to judge you, and part of your repentance process will be to see whether or not you're, checking the boxes. And he's going to play that role, and he's going to play the role of your therapist.
Yeah, and I didn't let that happen very long, and because as soon as I realized it, I was like, nope, not going to happen. But I will say that I did gain some understanding from my 2 sessions with him. So, they did say, go get that, but they didn't really have the emotional intelligence as people or an organization to understand really what was happening inside me or in her from the betrayal, right? From the infidelity, from the PTSD trauma. So the framework of the church was like, here, if you can just stop having the sacrament and change your behavior for a year, we're going to call you good. And you, Mrs. Beckham, Sister Beckham, you can just, you know, stay by his side and support him and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's completely clueless as to the trauma that she underwent. So I don't really have a lot of good things to say. There just isn't anything good there. But what it did bless us with was an understanding that the church was completely incompetent there, and that awakened us a little bit, a lot, into like a realization that this quote unquote the true church of Jesus Christ on the earth had a massive deficit in its ability to help people heal from trauma. So, I don't know, it didn't make sense. Like I was easily putting two and two together that it just didn't make sense anymore. So, yeah, hopefully that makes like
Yeah.
answers your question.
Was this the
Perfect.
beginning then for the two of you of maybe some like faith deconstruction and faith, like transitioning stuff, or did that come later?
Well, yeah. So, as with probably most people that are listening, most of your audience will understand this, is it's like you can't just like one day all of a sudden be out.
Mhm.
It's so embedded, it's so deep that like it's like baby steps that feel huge when you take them. And then in hindsight, you're like, oh, that wasn't actually as big. So this was a beginning process. I mean, we have on our website, there's actually a Polaroid picture of us that we took the Sunday of his disciplinary council, the first disciplinary council, and in that picture, you can just see him, and he's just really like, it's like so sad. His whole energy, his whole demeanor, it's just really sad. And there's a bit more of like this optimistic hope that you see in my expression. And this was because like I was like, we're doing it. I got him to come and confess. We sat before the Council of 12, and they all like, we've got action steps. And at this point we had started like a couples therapy. And I also had found a trauma informed yoga group for women who had all basically been through some level of betrayal. Um, and all of this was happening in Linden at the time, right? And so, like, I had been starting to gain a little bit more emotional awareness, a little bit more of this healing. And then we had this disciplinary council, and everything felt like we're on track, we're doing this, and we're still continued to go to church and really work hard through that full year of his disfellowship. But this is also what began to like really wake me up to the inequalities in the church and how it's just really ill-equipped to actually support women. Here I was, my husband had done this thing that had broken my heart, and there wasn't a single woman in this disciplinary council to be my advocate. There was all these men, and now they all knew my story, but I had so much shame about my actual story at that point that I couldn't, there was nobody I could open up to about what it really, like my parents didn't know, his family didn't know, like nobody really knew. And so then I leaned in to like my bishop at the time because he knew, he was part of the council. And I was like, I really need more support for my kids. I'm still working through so much trauma. I'm really sad and depressed, and I'm struggling. Um, like my visiting teachers that you assign me, like, can I have ones that are willing to like maybe do some childcare too? And instead of him responding positively to that, he said, well, do you think that I really don't want people to think you're taking advantage of them.
Wow.
And so I was even more shamed about my need for community. So I sat there thinking, well, if they're actually inspired by God, they're going to show up on my fucking doorstep and like help me out because I can't publicly show what it is that's really happening in this interior world. And nobody really showed up. And then he lost his job 6 months later, and the week of Thanksgiving. And the Relief Society brought us a box of food from the bishop's storehouse, but for Thanksgiving. But I felt like that was so like they were just so disconnected from who we really were.
We told them not to.
We told them not to, first of all. And then second, like if somebody actually knew me, they would know I would never use a can of cranberry sauce. Like bring me a bag of fresh cranberries or don't bring me cranberries, right? They had 3 cans of cranberry sauce in this box, and like it was just, I just realized how unseen I really was by this community that said they were rooted in like service of God, and like people were not inspired, because if they were, I would have really had somebody truly inspired show up for me. So full circle back to the disciplinary council, when we gathered together with the same group of 12 men for Britton to receive his good job. You did it. You made it through this year and now you're in full fellowship. After they restored that to him, they turned to me and they said, Sister Beckham, how was this experience for you? And this part in this present moment makes me so happy, because what did I say to them? I said, actually, you guys all failed. Like I literally told off the high council and I was like, what you think you've accomplished here is not, there's been no support for me. Like you guys need to rethink this whole thing, because you're all patting yourselves on the back that you've accomplished something great. But like as a woman in this church, I have been invisible in my deepest pain. And it didn't come, like my healing didn't come through this process. And you look at the picture the day it started, I had a completely different idea and hope for what that process could be than what it reality was. So yeah, like we still went to church after that, but we began to
We started to unwind.
We started to unwind, and we started to like have a bottle of wine together so that we could actually talk. We called it therapy in a bottle. And we didn't renew our temple recommend because we were drinking wine and we couldn't lie. Like there were steps. We started like not going to church as often and diving into other methods of healing. And that actually created a significant amount of cognitive dissonance, because it was like, oh, we're doing all the things we were told our whole life would be bad, but I feel closer to my partner and closer to myself and even closer to God. Like maybe what people say we shouldn't do is what we should do to like actually find ourselves, like it really was the beginning. And wow. I'm proud of ourselves for like giving the church like the real benefit, like we're going to do it this way. But yeah, it like showed us a completely different, like I had so much trauma in my body that I don't now, but like I was almost more traumatized through that process, that I then had to heal from the trauma of being a woman in that scenario. And what was placed upon me in regards to responsibility too, from like the patriarchal perspective. It was really eye-opening.
Wow, that's really powerful. I'm so glad you, I don't know, vocalize that so well. And every time I hear stories like this, I just want to remind everyone that I'm, very personally aware that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually declines offers for trauma-informed help, whether that's from the government or from associations like the Mormon Mental Health Association, or really? Therapists who have offered free trauma-informed training to the church as a whole. And I don't know, of course, about their inner workings and what they do internally, but my experience with LDS Family Services and many, many professionals who have gone through there, myself included, I do not trust that trauma-informed care is at the height, of importance that it should be. And when I hear stories like this, Carolee, it's pretty tragic, because the church is asking people to come to them with, like you're saying, their darkest moments, right? Their biggest struggles, their biggest betrayals, their biggest quote unquote sins, which are typically behaviors that are based in trauma in one way or another. Oftentimes, when we are acting out in ways that maybe even all of us would agree are not, morally where we want to be. But without a trauma-informed system to accept all of that information, then really more harm is caused than good. And that's a really tough lesson to learn when it hits so close to home, like for the two of you. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. Just you mentioned that you had sexual trauma as a kid, and maybe both of you did. I'm not exactly sure, but and you said, that starts kind of a relationship with sexuality, obviously, that's very fraught with much complexity. One thing that I notice, especially in, again, high demand religions where we tend to romanticize relationships in some very simplistic, kind of unrealistic ways of what husband and wife should and could mean to each other. I oftentimes hear this sense of like an added betrayal, because since I was hurt in this way, you as my partner should know not to hurt me sexually. And yet I don't know any relationship that hasn't hurt each other sexually, even if it doesn't go to the form of infidelity. We hurt each other sexually. I just don't know how we don't do that, as we grow together and learn together and negotiate together. And so I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that, like an added layer of betrayal if my partner knows that I was sexually hurt and damaged, and now they themselves are hurting and damaging me in this sexual way. Any thoughts about that?
I could give some thoughts. Firstly, I would say that, and I want to preface this deeply with the fact that I take full ownership of everything that happened in my experience, like absolute 100%. But there is something about unconscious energy when it is repressed that has its own form of consciousness. And it is why I think we call it the shadow self, because it's this thing, this entity that sort of takes control of the will a little bit. And to some degrees, a lot. You think about cold-blooded murder and things like that, people lose control completely to this energy. And in sex, I think it's no different. Like the most extreme examples come to mind, like rape and incest and things like that, all stemming from repressed or abusive sorts of sexual experiences. In my case, like it became a game. It became this energy toy that I could play with to gain energy, by a text or but when it got to the most intense point, I didn't feel like I was in control. And some of the choices were happening and I was just watching. And again, I'm taking full ownership of everything, but I'm just telling you the experience that I felt in my body
Mhm.
was that I was not in full control of what was happening. It was almost like things had to play out. And and so I honor the experience because man, it was crazy. But was I trying to, knowing that she had been sexually abused from her childhood and also myself, could there have been that there was absolutely no intentional desire to hurt her ever through this. In fact, I remember even in like immediately after like the first time I kissed a woman, I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done? I can't believe I did this to my beloved, my love, my wife, my partner." And I'm just in this deep shame already the moment after, like I separated from this other person. And it was, so I don't know how to answer your question. Is there another layer? Sure, there probably is. But I think those layers stack up to our advantage to help us to create more catalyst, more pressure, more spiritual pressure to get us to act and heal.
I guess I'll add to it too. Given the context of like how we were guided or lack thereof, truly, through actually healing these wounds from our childhood, um, I think that we were so like disconnected truly from the depths that we needed to actually heal, that there was no conscious idea that we could even project into those spaces, right? Like I remember it felt really revolutionary at this point in time. It was earlier in our marriage, and we were having an intimate moment, and I was struggling to feel connected to that moment. And I remember hypothesizing in that moment, I like wonder if my trauma from my childhood is stopping me here. Like I wonder if there's a block, and in that moment he kind of dismissed it a little bit, and he since has admitted to me that there was a little bit of this fear of like, if I admit that that could be her reality, then I'm even admitting that there's a part of her that's broken, right? Like we had so much fear around, there was so much fear
Yeah.
about talking about anything of a sexual nature, that there, when I had that realization, and like after some of what transpired in a relationship, I remember going to my parents and being like, you didn't really help me heal. And my mom booked me a session, like paid for a session, and I went to LDS Family Services, and I sat down with the therapist there. You talk about LDS Family Services as an adult woman, and I'm like, I think my sexual trauma from my childhood is impacting my present sexual embodiment and my experience. And the person just was like, oh, yeah. And I
Wow.
left that session, and I was like, that felt so like, I was like, I'm never going to talk to that person again. Like they didn't even validate what I now know really was a a source of inspiration coming through, of like, yeah, actually, that trauma from my childhood hadn't been healed. It hadn't been integrated. I completely disassociated during the experience, and I thankfully found some really profound healing opportunities to like integrate that experience from my childhood and really feel like I've healed it now. But it was a revolutionary idea in our marriage and our early partnership. So I think that we just honestly weren't even emotionally intelligent enough to recognize that the way in which we were treating each other might have had some threads, or might have been carrying over from our own trauma from our childhood. Now we see it. And now we're like guardians of our love and our relationship, and like really raising our children in a very like positive, healthy, boundaried, way around sexuality. But it's a completely night and day difference, between what happened to me. Like it was all hush hush, brush under the rug. This one thing happened, but we'll do like maybe one or two therapy sessions as a 10-year-old, and then we're just not going to talk about it anymore. I'm sure you're fine. That's the way it was handled then.
Right. Wow, that level of incompetence even surprises me for LDS Family Services. um, because you'd think there'd be some basic skills there as far as trauma informed ideas, from somebody who has hopefully a master's degree in some type of psychological science. So anyway,
Right? You think.
wow.
But
So
that was my
yeah,
experience. Yeah, I was like,
yeah.
this was so ineffective. I can't even.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get at is that I think that because I'm also a victim of childhood sexual abuse, and of course have, talked with hundreds, if not thousands of people by now about this kind of thing. And I think when we come from these systems that are, like you're saying, emotionally unintelligent, sexually unintelligent, and we're looking for healing, oftentimes the spouse is brought in like the answer, whether it's the woman who's going to be the caretaker and the the accommodator, or whether it's going to be the man who's going to be the protector, and that whatever those things are. And then we're shocked when actually you're the one hurting me, because you were supposed to be the new parental almost figure of the caretaker and in charge of my healing, instead of me being in charge of my own healing, and recognizing that you also probably have healing to do. Like you're saying, you were both you were coming into this relationship like we all do with traumas, right? Whether it's parental neglect, whether it's sexual trauma, whether it's just systems that we come from, we all come into these relationships. And then there's this almost added layer of betrayal because we have so unrealistic expectations of what this person is going to be able to offer us. I mean, hopefully we can be each other's allies. And hopefully, like you just used a lovely term, guardians of our relationship, like hopefully we can get to those spaces. But we're going to have to do that through a lot of learning and healing and doing our own work. And it sounds like the two of you really tapped into that. So let's use the last few minutes here that we have together to really kind of, I know there's tons of things you can share, and I know you're open to people. I believe you're going to try to, I don't know if it's coaching or something that you're going to try to offer others who are maybe going through similar things. But what are some of the basic ways that you started pivoting, that you started realizing, maybe there is a different path here? You mentioned wine. like with your ability, right? To emotional intimacy. That's funny. And not to
actually, it really did help. Sometimes if you just have an experience where you get to feel something that you've never felt before, it really opens your horizons. And so in a way, alcohol did that because we were able to like finally drop our guard a little bit. It's not like it was truly healing us, but it did actually open up some pathways for us to like connect again.
Right. And I never want to minimize, I know there's a lot of people who struggle with alcoholism, or not everybody can have a healthy relationship with alcohol, but I do exactly like what you said, whether it's that or it's something else. What was the path like that you feel started heading you down to the direction where you're sitting here together in a very different space than you were so many
Yeah, it's such a different space, because now we really feel like we're conscious co-creators in this like super divine union that has like cosmic level bliss. We drop in intimately together and hours go by and we're just so happy throughout the whole experience, and then just carry that energy in, and we love our kids, and we have this beautiful home in Colorado now. Like we traveled the world, like we really dialed in. But what helped kind of segue into that, right? So we did the disciplinary council. We realized how ineffective it was. We did um, an emotional re-education. We found courses like your course that really helped me help reframe. We had some really beautiful psilocybin journeys that were all like, we before we dove into that, we read Michael Pollan's book How to Change Your Mind, and we approached those journeys from a very like conscious healing container kind of mindset. In fact, the very first one we did, we literally went to church the very next day because it was the primary program and we had commitments. And that was the last time we ever went to church.
Oh,
Jeez.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a whole
Mushroom afterglow is another story.
that's another story. But like, there were moments too where, because of the nature of our wounding in our relationship, we also leaned in and had very sacred experiences with MDMA, from a very like conscious place of being able to open up our hearts and have a conversation. There were at least 2 times where we thought we were going in to have a conversation about, or 3, about how to consciously uncouple. Like we weren't sure that we could actually stay together. But we didn't make that choice to separate quickly. We allowed ourselves to like move through this process. And when we dropped in with those medicines, we didn't have any conversation about separating. We just made love for hours on end, and like really found that we've been in partnership perhaps even throughout lifetimes. Like there's just something really beautiful about the union that we came here, and like the gift of him holding that presence with me so that I could heal my childhood also healed like generational patterns, and same for him, and so we had some help along the way. But the coaching that we now do, And also the book that we're writing that's coming out later this year is about ritual shadow work. And it's how we've used the container of our partnership to actually witness and mirror our shadows so that we can hold them in love. Like, and this we do through astrological alignment. Actually, we like work with the cycles and the phases of the moon to illuminate the shadow within. And like, there's this whole thing, and we came to it really intuitively. It literally started with a self-care bath. Like, I literally just started bathing with the moon, and I had no idea how profound that simple act of candles and wine and chocolate and music and a bath tea blend would transform my life and bring me home to myself, right? Like, the journey, all of this is possible, but like, we have to make that choice to be like, what do I want to be? I wanted to be an embodied woman who enjoyed, like, when we got engaged, when we were dating, and he said, this is what I want. He was very clear in his communication about the kind of sexual relationship he wanted. I actually wanted all of those things too, but I was so deeply programmed to not know how to actually healthily achieve that. And so, like, my desires for that didn't change. And I'm so grateful now that there are various different modalities and re-educational programs and ways in which to like come back to our greatest embodiment. Want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I would just say, that there was a lot, like the entire journey of healing is so complicated and dynamic, and that there's no like um one thing that any person should do. There's lots of things that they can integrate and use, and they should. That's why we have so many types of healers out there and so many types of different experiences and medicines. But I will say that the what we have stumbled across in doing ritual shadow work, because everybody's doing shadow work, that's what healing is. What we've done is we've turned it into a way of life that's ritualistic in nature. Like what we've basically said was like, we know that we're going to be doing shadow work the rest of our life. There's no getting around it. There's no bypassing it. Hello, everyone that's listening right now. There's no way you're going to heal unless you're deep in your shadows and you're willing to do it all the time. And it's not because you're just so broken, it's just because that's the calling you have. You need to recognize that we are here to actually take on the generational traumas and heal them once and for all, for the lines, for humanity. So that's our great calling. So how do we step into it consciously? Well, we do it ritualistically. We take it from a conscious perspective. We work with the energies that are available to us. Carolee and I have chosen to work with the moon and different astrological alignments, and that is very powerful because the moon is actually the guiding source of our shadow work. And so when we work with the moon, we attune ourselves to that cosmic clock, then we actually can leverage, it's like leveraging waveforms. Think about amplification, right? When you synchronize energy, when you synchronize waveforms, you're synchronizing the potential. And so the healing of potential and its effectiveness and efficiency is increased through this method. And that's why we're very passionate about it. And that's kind of a technical, nerdy way to say it, but it's real. And what it's really about is opening your heart with your partner, stepping into deep mirroring for the other, holding space, not taking offense, learning how to love, trust, and deeply connect with the other person, and then sealing that sacred container through sacred sexuality. And so what we found was every time we were doing healing work and we were, it's like makeup sex, they talk about makeup sex. Well, what we realized was that makeup sex is really healing. And when we started connecting it with the moon and the work that we were doing, it was just like so much more powerful. And so we found that we could heal deeper and faster with this energy and this alignment. So there's a very cool thing that we're teaching. It's ritual shadow work, and the book that we're writing is going to kind of detail that method and that approach. But we are working with couples and singles to help them establish this protocol sort of thing in their own shadow work.
It's like literally the intersection of sexuality and spirituality. You know, like the very thing we were told to be shamed about is actually the very thing that can give us the greatest liberation.
Mhm.
You know, and when you understand, you know, before, like, all of this is really gentle, and the way we hold our containers, because of the level of trauma we've experienced, there's a lot of like trauma informed awareness, and even how we guide people into this cosmic connection and activation in what we do. But like, you know, it's like it was so gentle that it really helped me. It like was such a beautiful assist to all of the other programs and all of the other things that we were learning, and the medicine journeys. And even now we've been able to like take it to an even, like, I had to find my safety within myself before I could really truly drop in with him. And so, like, that was a huge part of all of these other things that we did, all the healing that I was seeking for. I finally put it together and feel that true sense of safety within. And we have beautiful agreements in our partnership now. And we play with our sexuality, we play with each other, and we call in our healing through this divine connection. And in a lot of ways, you know, full circle, like, we actually really love Jesus, but not a Christian Jesus, like a Yeshua and Mary Magdalene divine union thing. And so, like, we play even with that and those teachings, and like the understanding of like who we are as a soul and as a being and as a body and as a lover. You know, it's all it's I like to sometimes actually refer to my life in Mormonism as my past life in this life.
Mm,
And you know, we're an open book. Like, we
yeah.
have no more shame, so we can really, you ask a hard question about what we've really been through, we'll tell it. And in fact, we're also writing books, The Magical Story of Us, where he's going to do a tell-all expose on what he really went through and what really happened, and I'm going to do a tell-all expose about what I was really going through, because we feel like there's not an there's so much shame even still around these kinds of stories, that we're just ready to like let people see that you can love your life and what you've been through, and that it's good to hear these inspiring stories of how people really overcome.
Yeah. Well, which is why I like having people with personal stories on, because it just gives it a different type of energy to it. And two words that you just both recently used that I really find very powerful are ritual and play. I think when we come from religion and maybe we've been harmed from religion, we tend to stay away from these kinds of words like ritual or, ceremonies or symbols or sacraments. But all these words are not owned by any one entity, and so the reclamation, I think, is what's so important, right? Of these things that, quite frankly, human ritual has been around since we can remember, as far as anything that we find as geologically, even, is full of ritual and ceremony and meaning making, right? Is really what ritual is about, and honing into yourself in a very powerful way. Even as you were talking about, connecting to the moon and astrology, I'm sure some people love that. They listen to that and they're like, oh, that's so cool. And there's other people that are like, whatever, this sounds woo woo, or, whatever. And it doesn't. And I love that you both said, like, it can be a lot of different things. There's not one way to heal. But what I would like people to listen to, especially if they're having that reaction of that sounds kind of a little woo woo or wonky, is, first of all, it doesn't have to be that. And second of all, even if it is that or something different, what is really powerful is finding meaningful symbology and ritual in your life, right? And then when you mentioned play, yeah, when did we think about sex as play? I think in a lot of what you're sharing with your story, it reminds me of how much we were driven in Mormonism, and I think in a lot of different cultures by behavior, by behavioral standards, even the whole discipline thing, right? When I was like, well, what was the healing journey like, Britton? It was like, well, monitoring my behavior, and
That's what it's about, man.
if I do
It's
that
a
for
very
long
outward
enough,
appearances sort of thing.
if I
So
monitor my behavior for 6 months plus, then I'll get my gold star, my checkbox. But what you're talking about is much more, like you said, embodied. It's play. It's really having deep conversations. It's about curiosity. It's about being able to tolerate our own selves when our partner shows up different than ourselves, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of beautiful to think about that. I think how I was role modeled behavior relationships was, quite frankly, parents, grandparents, friends, neighbors, really trying to change each other. That's really what I was role modeled, which again is very behavior driven, right?
yep.
Don't do that behavior because it either embarrasses me or it hurts me or it doesn't resonate with me, instead of just really being with the person as they are, which is,
Yeah, that's such a
yeah.
novel concept in a way, when it comes to like religion and family structures and stuff. Like the the beauty of creation is diversity. And when we integrate, we're not trying to assimilate, we are trying to integrate. And when we integrate the differences of the whole, we become the one. And this is why, like, a lot of Eastern philosophy talks about God and everything, because God is infinite and and touches everything. There isn't something outside of God. God is all the things. And so, like we stop thinking about God as a single entity, a person. It's just God is all of creation and its beautiful flow. And when we hate something about creation, we hate ourselves, we hate God, we hate life. So we must find a way to integrate and love everything, and then we find the freedom within is liberated.
Mm, yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're pretty much at the end of our time together. I want to make sure so people know you're working on a book called Ritual Shadow Work. So look for that in the future. It sounds like maybe later this year or early next year.
Later this year.
And then you have your website, which is called themagicalstoryofus.com. And I'll make sure and link to that. But I'd like to just give you both a chance to kind of give, last thoughts, or maybe I didn't ask something that you were hoping I would ask, or just kind of what would you like to leave us with?
Well, what I feel impressed to like share one final thing is based on what you were just saying about the way in which we were programmed to like look at partnership as needing to like change the other or like adjust the other's behavior. And I had this really like crucial moment in my own healing back in April of 22 where I'm an Enneagram 4, so I can be really dramatic, poetic and dream, all those things. But I felt impressed to actually rip up my temple dress that I had gotten married in. Was really angry with him and I like ripped it in front of him. And then I had taken this poem that he had recited and written for me on our wedding day. And I called together a few other women and we held like a very witchy under the full moon in April grief circle. And what I did in that moment, and this is why what your story or what you said about our view on partnership, why I wanted to share this is I I felt like I needed to say goodbye to my hopes and my dreams because
Mm,
I realized as a little girl the hopes and dreams that I had deeply programmed through Young Women's, through Mary Miss, through just everything that I had done. I mean, even I remember as a Laurel, one of our firesides was like I pretended I was getting married and it was a civil wedding and it was like this whole over the speaker stuff. I mean, I won't get into it, but it was this whole thing that I look at now and I'm like, what a toxic activity. But like I was so programmed to see relationships a certain way. And I realized I needed to disconnect from everybody else's idea of what a healed partnership looked like. And so these women were together. This was the first time I claimed that my husband had been unfaithful. I had been so scared to admit it. I admitted it to this group of 3 other women, and I literally burned my temple dress and I burned the poem that he had written and got gold embossed, right? Like this is part of that ritual play. Like it was a ritual goodbye, a ritual ending, so that I wouldn't necessarily end my partnership with him, but so that I could clear the energy that was blocking me because I really hadn't actually, when I got down to the truth of it, there weren't really any, if any, partnerships, relationships that I had seen in the entire culture that I was part of that I would say that's a successful one.
Wow.
That's, you know,
Yeah.
and so I realized we were all kind of drinking the same Kool-Aid of what a successful partnership looked like. And I needed to let go of all of it, put it on the table, and see if something new could emerge. And so that was like, I mean, it was Easter Sunday the next day too. So I felt really like poetic and like death and rebirth, and I'm claiming something new. But like we have to like see our own beliefs and be willing to disconnect from them, be willing to say goodbye, and be willing to be curious about what else could be. And we've now evolved into this partnership that is of our own making, that we really feel lit up about. And yeah, like we just have our baseline is bliss. And it was not for like most of these years that we've referenced in
Right.
the call tonight.
Right. That's beautiful. Thank you, Carolee. Britton, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, you said that idiom right, and I'm really proud of you.
What idiom? I usually
Um,
say things wrong.
uh, we can go back and look at it, but it was, I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was right. And you
You're
said,
so proud of me.
so, um, so yeah,
Oh.
Carol, it's funny. I was thinking, what do I want to say? And like what came to my mind was, I want to tell people that they can have a designer relationship. And then she starts talking about that. So we're very in tune, and telepathy is a part of our relationship experience.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, you can choose. So like, we've been told how we have to live, what things should look like. We've been conditioned with so many freaking layers of stuff. And when you when you begin the healing path, you quickly start to realize that you can actually say no to a lot of things, and it's
mm,
okay.
mm,
And one of the things that Carolee and I chose into is just we're going to create a relationship, a union. We don't really use the word marriage or married or any of that. We're a beloved together. We're a
mm,
we. And our union is a powerful choice that we created, and we've created our own terms, our own way to relate, our own happiness and joy around how we want to experience our relationship. And through shadow work, through commitment to your healing, you will have the relationship, you will have the life, you will have the joy and the other relationships, not just your sacred one that you always wanted. And so that's what I would say, like if it's not through, our coaching services and our guidance, there is so much opportunity to tap into that from others. And I would just, offer people to like the pathways before you just choose into one thing differently you want to do right now, that you're just like, I just want to do this differently, and tell your heart that, tell spirit that, and just watch the door open and magic start to pour in.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. And I wish you well on this new venture, and kind of sounds like you're definitely using your journey to now, go forward together and help other people. So that's really beautiful. And I love hearing the psilocybin and the MDMA. And I know that's not always legal in all the different places. Here we have ketamine, which I've really enjoyed working with. And I agree that there's so much possibility when we start thinking outside the very limited boxes. Most of us, I believe, even outside of Mormonism, most of us have been constrained by so many expectations and standards instead of just being allowed to be. So I congratulate you on really intentionally moving into shame-free spaces, which I think it takes a lot of intention and takes a lot of permission giving, right? To each other, to yourselves. So really beautiful to speak with you all today, and I wish you the very best. So
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Natasha.
Natasha.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Now tishki say the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. Years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. No tishki shade, no. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland.